Okay. Working.
Okay. We will begin with Okay, we will begin with roll call and alphabetical order. Bill Bunsenbeek.
Here.
Cheryl Caruana. Here. Sean Kennedy.
Here.
Lisa Murray.
Here.
Rich Rediker. Mike Tirabassi. And Michelle Boudreaux. Aye, here. We will turn it over to the Hamden Board of Select if you'd like to call the order.
Call to order the Board of Selectmen of Town of Hamden, and also I'd like to introduce our new town administrator, Brian Domino.
Wilbraham Board of Select.
We are present, now ready to call us to order.
Okay. Advisory, Hamden Advisory.
Yeah, we're not going to call ourselves to order. We're not going to deliberate or discuss as a board.
Okay. Wilbraham FinCom.
Call us to order, and we don't have a quorum in the room, but I can't see who's online, so.
And is there anyone else here that would like to call to order? Okay. Well, we will, if you please stand, I will have Sean lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Flag's behind you, right over there. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you all for being here this evening. We are going to begin with the guest introductions. So I begin with John. Okay. We're beginning with introductions.
John Provost, Superintendent. Aaron Osborne, Assistant Superintendent.
John Matthews, Hamden Advisory Committee.
Try to use the microphones, everyone, because we are recording this, so everyone can hear.
No,
Kevin Hanks, Wilbraham Finance.
Mark Ducey, Wilbraham Finance.
Doug Boyd, Hamden Advisory.
Subino, Wilbraham Select Board. Terry Goodrich, Wilbraham Select Board.
Nick Bro, Wilbraham Town Administrator.
Mike Swindell, Wilbraham Select Board.
Brian, State Rep, Second Hamden District.
Angelo Pupo, State Rep, 12th Hamden.
Todd Schreider, Wilbraham Finance.
Sherry Spinks, aide to Representative Pupula.
Brian Domina, Hamden Town Administrator.
Greg Urbis, Hamden Board of Selectmen.
Don Davenport, Hamden Board of Selectmen. I suggest as a capital item, we get more microphones.
John Flynn, Hamden Selectman.
Phil Von Tempe, School Committee.
Sean Kennedy, School Committee from Wilbraham.
Lisa Murray, School Committee, Wilbraham.
Cheryl Caruana, School Committee, Wilbraham.
And Michelle Boudreaux, Chair of the School Committee. So thank you again for being here. We are going to begin with the FY25 overview from our Assistant Superintendent of Finance, Operations, and Human Resources, Aaron Osborne.
Alrighty. I think we're trying to get the presentation up on the big screen. One moment. But we can go ahead and start. Everyone, there are copies of the budget, 2 slides to a page while we work on that. So if we start from the very first slide, this budget is based very strongly in our District 5-year strategic plan. This was created through a year-long process. Included many members of the community. A number of the people here were part of that planning committee. We worked with the Mass Association of Regional Schools to complete that, and I think you'll see many of the themes of that strategic plan embedded within this budget. Oh, we're getting there. So if you go to the next slide, fiscal 25 budgeted strategic initiatives, year 2. We are in year 2 of our strategic plan. In each given year, we do much more than 2 strategic initiatives. These are the items that have specific financial implications. So some things we've been doing haven't specifically had costs, or have had costs that we've been able to offset by reducing costs elsewhere through exchanges. So the 2 major items that we're looking at for this year is math professional development in line with our new math curriculum for K-8, as well as addition of 9th grade vocational, which is in line with our strategic plan. You can see both of the strategic objectives down below that relate to these 2 items. So when we go to the next slide, these are just a few of the major accomplishments we've had this past year. We've completed an MTS, multi-tiered systems of support document, version 1.1. I keep calling it 2.0. I get ahead of the game, but we'll be 2.0 at the start of next year, I believe. We've implemented new early literacy and math curricula. The early literacy is based in the science of reading. We've also trained teams at each school to implement comprehensive school threat assessment guidelines. Again, all 3 of these items are in line with our strategic plan. So now I'm going to turn it over for John to talk a little bit about how we're leading the way.
Thank you. And as we've been working through the budget process over the course of the past several months, one of the things that Mr. Ducey has frequently said is it's important for the community to know, what are your metrics? How are you measuring success? What are some of the things you look at in terms of knowing whether or not what we're doing is working? And so these next few slides are excerpted from a much longer presentation that's given every fall. It's called the Accountability Report, that is probably an hour and a half or 2 hours long, and we go into many more measures, but I'll give you just some of the high-level ones that also sort of lay out the framework of how we look at things. So we, of course, first and foremost, focus on achievement. And we have a few groups that we consider when looking at our own performance. First, we look at statewide averages, and so where did the state as a whole do in terms of achievement? On this graph and the next one, that is represented by the blue line. Here we're looking at 10th graders in English language arts who met or exceeded expectations on MCAS, which is the statewide achievement exam. The next group we take a look at is the LVPEC districts. As you know, we're part of 7 districts that are in this collaborative. The yellow line represents the LVPEC districts. Although we do pay attention to both of those, what we look at even more closely are our peer districts. These are a group of 10 districts that are identified by the Department of Education as being most like us in terms of our student profile and all the districts in the state. And so that group is the group that's in green. Of course, we are in all 3 groups. And you can see here that for the first time in 2023, maybe a little bit hard to see, but our group, our high school did better than all of the groups. Better than the average for our peer groups, better than the average for the LVPEC groups, and a lot higher than the statewide average. The next one looks at math in the same way. So now that you know the framework, I won't go through that. But again, you see the same results. Again, higher than our peer districts, higher than the districts in the LVPEC, and higher than the statewide average. So those are just 2 measures of student achievement. A third thing that has come up is people want to know, well, are students being successful after they leave our schools? And so here, we don't have the same kind of fine-grained analysis, but we can give you our results as compared to the state. And we look at 2 things, really. We look at, first of all, the percentage of students who enroll in post-secondary education, although that is a rather narrow measure of success because we have students who go into the military, go into careers immediately after graduation, and obviously those are successes as well. But this is just looking at post-secondary success. And then we look at the amount who are still enrolled 1 year later. And that's because the dropout rate in higher ed is most significant in freshman to sophomore year, If you can maintain students into sophomore year, they are very likely to get a degree either 2 years down the road or 4 years down the road or some years, 5 years down the road. But if they're not going to make it, they're most likely not going to make it in the first or second year. And so you can see that a much larger percentage of our graduates are enrolling in post-secondary as compared to the statewide average and maintaining that into the second year. In fact, we have a higher percentage of our graduates who are still enrolled in their sophomore year of college than the percentage of students statewide who even enroll in post-secondary at all. So those are just a couple of our measures of achievement. If you want more of this, I invite you to the accountability report coming up next fall, where we will break down all of this in much more detail.
Alrighty. So the next slide is a slide that we've shared each of the past few years as we've watched low income progress, our low income communities. If you look across the state and across our region, we have seen low income populations increase drastically. Our low income population has increased by a full 17 percentage points, so that's not a 17% increase. That is a full 17% increase in those numbers. When I talk about low income, one of the things I always share is that the average low income student costs 35% more than a non-low income student to educate. I've brought that up and people have asked sort of where does that come from. 2004 study by the Syracuse University Center for Policy Research showed that at 41.5%, and then a 2013 study by the California budget process had it at 30%, and averaging those two studies more or less. So one of the items I think I get asked a lot is why is our budget so much different from, say, Long Meadows or East Long Meadows? One of the things we have to recognize as we're preparing our budget is that the school district, for a regional school district, carries a number of costs that a municipal district like a Long Meadow or East Long Meadow or West Springfield doesn't. These are just some examples of health insurance for employees, retiree health insurance, retiree contributions. Those three items alone add up to around $8.5 million in our budget. So that's a significant item that doesn't sit on those budgets. It's just to talk about how you really can't create an apples to apples between a regional school district and a municipal school district. So moving to the next, we get into what are some of our major increases this year. We've actually had a pretty good year, and you'll see in the next few slides some conversation about our contractual salaries number. As a baseline, the dollar increase was at $492,505, pretty reasonable. The next item is instructional technology. This is an item, and we'll talk about this in the next slide, that was requested to put onto our operating budget. This is something we've had largely on our capital budgets in the past. Some of the items on here are things we paid out of end-of-year funds sometimes when we had money remaining, but we were encouraged to no longer continue that practice, so we're moving them onto the budget. Utilities, a lot of that is in electric. Many of you are aware of the lighting issue at this building. Lighting costs have gone up precipitously in the past couple of years. Additionally, I tried to factor for the fixing of our lighting issue here at the high school. So a few factors in that have made it a little difficult to predict, but that's where we are. Other district programs, those are always a fairly expensive proposition, and those amounts, you'll recall, last year we had a 14% increase from OSD, and then a few other items, strategic plans, insurance, vocational programming. So moving to the next slide. This is the breakdown of that instructional technology item. So the very first item, the biggest item, is Chromebooks for one-to-one programming. This is something we've funded in the past few years out of the ESSER grant. So we've used ESSER funds to maintain this at the middle and high school level. Those funds have dried up, so we need to fund these going forward. Classroom projectors, we just replaced a number of classroom projectors in this building that were original to this building when it was built around 12 years ago. We do need to replace projectors across the district, and we need to build into a cycle of replacement for those. The same with staff laptops. Staff laptops was something, again, we bought using typically end-of-year funds when those were available, tried to replace piecemeal. This creates a real plan for replacing staff laptops. Finally, related to the Chromebooks, you'll see $35,000 for Securely software, which is our security software and control software for those Chromebooks. Moving on to the next item. We have some budget savings. So coming out of those contractual salaries, we've had some pretty significant reductions in staffing due to moves from Green Meadows Middle School to the, Green Meadows Middle School classes to Wilbraham Middle School. So students have, by and large, left Green Meadows and gone to Wilbraham Middle School via the transfer process. So we've reduced some staff there. We actually had, despite a 3% increase to our retiree health insurance, we actually had a pretty significant decrease in retiree health insurance overall. Some of that has to do with retirees choosing Medicare plans rather than sort of full cost plans. Sorry. You'll also note in red down at the bottom, we managed to secure a 0% increase to our employee health insurance this year. That was a significant gap. They were holding a significant amount of cash, and we pushed them towards keeping that at 0%. That represents about $130,000 of savings relative to what I initially budgeted. So as we went through the budget process, that came to play. So what are some of our revenue changes? So one of our big challenges is going to be the loss of ESSER grants. So we were supporting the budget to the tune of about $350,000 on ESSER. That was to save jobs and to make sure that programming stayed in place. Our excess and deficiency, you'll recall we used a significant amount of excess and deficiency in each of the last 2 years. Our current excess and deficiency sits at $763,000, and that's the amount that we've put against the budget this year. So we've used all of our excess and deficiency. Athletics, given some of the challenges we've had with athletics and costs in the past couple of years, I've decided to pull out some of that offset so that it's not used against the budget. On the good note, circuit breaker, based on some of our sort of increased costs over the past few years and out of district placements, we're getting an additional $340,000. We have some transportation reimbursement we're budgeting for. We're expecting that to be a little higher than last year. Some small grant increases, and we're expecting to get a little bit more in interest income this year. So in the past 2 years, partially as a result of the loss of ESSER grants, but also the move of Green Meadows and some other choices we've made to endeavor to capture some reductions in staff, we've reduced our staff by about $1,055,201, give or take. So that's a pretty significant amount. Total FTE of 16.7 positions. So this is a reminder, I referenced it before, but last year we shared that the Operational Services Division of the state approved a 14% increase to out-of-district private placements. Reminder, that hit every district in the state, regardless of their status. As long as you had a student in a private out-of-district placement, it hit you. We have a number of kids who are in those placements. We estimated the cost due to those placements at upwards of $300,000. Moving to the next slide. There was a reserve relief put forth by legislature, and given we have some legislators here, it's interesting how this formula played out. So this was done with a fairly complicated formula built into it. It required an increase in cost of 7.55%. You can see below, our increase in cost was 13.5% to our special education circuit breaker. So we met the standard there. However, there was a requirement that your total cost be greater than 0.5% of your fiscal 23 net school spending. I have no idea why that was there. I don't know if our legislators can speak to that later, but we did not meet that. So we absolutely were impacted, right? Regardless of the outcome of that on our budget, that impacted us, it impacted every district, but we did not qualify for relief. So the next item up, just to make people aware of, is the Student Opportunity Act. We are one of 211 districts that will receive minimum Chapter 70 aid, meaning we get $0 in student activity and in Student Opportunity Act money, along with 210 other districts. That is out of 318 districts in the state. So the district will need to produce a Student Opportunity Act plan. We had it approved at our last school committee meeting, and we will submit that on time. However, I think it's important to remember that this is yet another unfunded mandate for 211 out of 318 districts across the state. So as we do that, we get into our proposed 2025 budget. So our proposed 2025 budget is $54,239,159, a net increase of $1,299,219 at a 2.45% increase. It includes a lot of, as you can see, reduced positions. Again, many of those are sort of natural reductions due to staffing changes and student shifts. So when we start talking about assessments, this is a list of assessment increases by some regional districts across the state. You can see the average is 4.59%. Our net assessment increase is 3.62%. You'll see in a few minutes that this impacts our two towns a little differently. There's been an ongoing shift in numbers away from Hamden and towards Wilbraham, so that sort of changes things. Some other local towns, I've shared this at our school committee meeting. East Hampton right now is at a 10% budget. Northampton is 8%. Amherst Regional Schools is looking at $1.7 million in shortfall. Mahar is looking at a 4.96% budget. Those are some communities throughout our region. Some others, Brookline is facing $2.5 million in cuts. I actually sat with some people from Pittsfield on Friday. They're looking at a $3.6 million shortfall. Marblehead, $2.3 million in cuts. Braintree, $8 million in potential cuts on a 13% budget. Danvers is looking at a 6.41% increase, and Andover is looking at $2.7 million in potential budget cuts. So when we get to the actual assessments to the towns, based on our fiscal 25 proposal, minimum local contributions a factor, then we factor in transportation assessment, then there's a discretionary amount, that's the total budget less those other items. Then that gives us an operating assessment, then we have the Minichog debt assessment. So total assessment for Hamden, we're looking at $8,813,481. Wilbraham, $30,237,234 for a total combined assessment of $39,050,715. I won't go through all of the items again. These are the actual changes in assessment for Hamden. Hamden is looking at a total change of $245,288 at a net percent change of 2.86%. For Wilbraham, we're looking at $1,118,010 for a change in assessment of 3.84%. So a little conversation about where the money comes from to fund the district. So the vast majority of it, as you can imagine, comes from the Wilbraham assessment. They're the bigger of the two towns. They fund about 80% of the assessments. The next is Chapter 70, $12,425,444. Bear in mind, year after year, we're a minimum AIDS district. So we only get increases of $30 per student, which is less than 0.5% usually. So it falls to the towns to make up for that difference, which is really important. Hamden assessment at $8,813,000. Then we have some transportation reimbursement, excess and deficiency, tiny sliver for interest, and a small sliver for Medicare reimbursement that we receive. So then, where do we spend all of this money? So more than half of the money we spend directly in instructional services. That's teachers in the classroom, some support in the classrooms, paras, things like that. The next biggest piece is again, so the next piece involving students is other school services. Other school services includes nursing, transportation, athletics, and student activities. Those are all items that are essential to students, very important to their lives here as part of the school community. Next, we look at fixed costs. Fixed costs is that retirement, health insurance, things like that we talked about. So those three items, employee, retiree, health insurance, and retirement add up to about $8.5 million. There are a few other smaller items that bring this up to that $9.3 million. Operations and maintenance, this is what keeps the schools clean, running, operating, maintained, keeps the lights on, more or less. Then out of district, this is another direct student service. These are students in out of district placements, whether it be through LP-VAC or through a private out of district placement. Then we get to debt service, we can't really change much about that. And then leadership and administration at $1.3 million, roughly 2.3% of our budget. So finally, we'll close by just talking about Minnechaug's capital needs. So Minnechaug is the regional building in the district. We have a wireless system that is original to this building. So when we talk about the building being 12 years old and the projectors being 12 years old, our Wi-Fi system is also 12 years old. That technology is dated. Most people will tell you that you want to replace your Wi-Fi system every 8 years or so. So we're pretty far behind on that. We do have a great opportunity to sort of leapfrog technologies, which is a good thing, and move to the next standard. And I believe that is it. Thank you very much. Questions? Okay.
Okay. All right, so we will go on to the capital planning needs. Does anyone have any questions, comments, or concerns? Anyone at school committee?
Michelle? Aaron, did you have a chance to check in Green Meadows to see about those exterior doors?
I have not had a chance for that, sorry. I know that was recent. I haven't had a chance to.
Do you anticipate that being brought to the meeting in May?
It's not immediate on our list, so it's not something that was planning to come up this year. I was more thinking it would be something we'd look at for down the road. Yeah, so I apologize if I misunderstood.
No problem. I just want to make sure that we're not waiting on a capital item for the current year.
Aaron, just a quick question. The out-of-district expenses, I know you talked about them going up over the last sort of like, say, 5 years. What's the percentage that you've seen that rise?
Out-of-district, typically, in terms of OSD increases or our own increases. So our own increases, our out-of-district population isn't terribly big, so you're dealing with a small sample size, there's a lot of variance. A single move-in sometimes can cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars, so it can go way up. We can have a single move-out. When I look at OSD figures, though, for the past 10 plus years, it typically was in the 3.5% range for many, many years. So if we're getting into that sort of 14% increase from OSD, that was quite a loop for us. Right? We expect them to increase it, you know, by a reasonable amount. And, you know, 3.5 was always expected. Is that?
I know that that's a, you know, obviously a cost is troubling to a certain extent, and not much can be done about it. But in that commitment, depending on when that happens, right? It could be a 4-year commitment, it could be, you know, cost-wise, right? So you're
Yeah.
building in that sort of baking that money in from sort of, you know, first year all the way up to
Yeah.
senior. It happens, right? And then it kind of domino effect.
Yeah, I mean, we can have a student, you know, need to go into an out-of-district placement as early as kindergarten, and they may be there until they're 22. So it's not just an 18 thing. So, you know, they're there from 6 to 22, 16 years. We could carry them. That's not typical, but that can happen.
I know it's hard to sort of assess, but what grades are we talking? I know I'm looking at like, to me, I see more of it in the, you know, high school sort of section, but you're saying now, all the way down to kindergarten. So
I mean, we could have a kindergarten. I'm not saying that's typical. I think it's more typical for students to need out-of-district placements in the middle to high school years. You're correct there. I think we see more of those happening 7th to 10th grade. Right? Those are tough transitions for kids. Even before COVID, I would definitely say that anxiety and depression among teens was epidemic, and COVID really just put that into overdrive. So, you know, we have kids in out-of-district placements for severe anxiety, depression, things like that.
I got a quick one here. How many of the schools like us got none of the circuit breaker reserve relief?
I honestly don't know who didn't get it. I would guess, given that metric, not a lot, because it's a pretty big bar relative to what that increase would have been. So if I go back to that page, give me a second, I found it. I believe it was 265,000. We would have had an increase of more than 40%. That was, you know, or 40,000, which, I mean, we would have had an increase of almost 20% in our out-of-district costs to have reached that threshold.
And did OSD say anything about why the private schools needed a 14% increase, but yet the public schools didn't need a 14%?
That was the rate of inflation in their mind. So that's a result of inflationary pressures, probably a little bit staffing pressures. So, you know, when they need to hire people, they need to pay them more.
Wouldn't that apply to us also?
Absolutely would.
Thank you.
Yep.
I'll go back to the, you know, if I may, Madam Chairman, go back to the staffing reductions. Thornton Burgess, you've got 2 staffing reductions. Do you anticipate discontinuing use of Thornton Burgess in the near future?
Say again?
Do you anticipate use of Thornton Burgess in the near future?
That's a conversation we're having. You know, knowing we are moving students out of it this year, now that 8th grade, you know, we pretty much made the decision not to move 8th grade up here for this year. This is sort of our window to move the students from there to here. We have pretty significant, you know, just having students there means we have to have a custodian on pretty regularly. We only have, you know, 8 to 10 students in that program at any given time. It just makes less and less sense to keep that program there while we need to have a full-time custodian for that building, basically. So if we move the students out and it's just offices are much easier to clean. We could have someone in there, you know, 2 mornings a week for a couple hours and take care of that. We are looking at what it would look like to move some of the offices out of there, and possibly into Minnechaug, just in preparation for the reality that, you know, those people will feel increasingly isolated. They're further away from the students we serve, further away from resources, things like that.
And the other question I have is on the assistant principal at Green Meadow School. Is that because there's no one in the middle school there?
Yeah, it was added to help a few years back to support the middle school there. Now that we really don't have a middle school there anymore, it just didn't make sense.
And how many to protect next year in September in the middle school there?
That's going to depend. We have transfers. I'm not sure when we're doing transfers, but the school committee will do transfers fairly soon, I'd imagine.
Last year you had like 4, 0 in 7th and 2 in 8th or something like that.
I don't know, how many students do we have? I want to say,
You've got an attendance report.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah, 302.
Yeah, so 5 total students
Yeah,
in
that's right.
middle school.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm done with this witness.
Oh, Bill is next.
Thanks, Michelle. So, Aaron, I just wanted to touch upon something that sort of surfaced over the last couple of weeks in conversation. We talked the other night in school committee about the vocational training and the fact that when we did our strategic plan, and I think Terry, you were there, Craig, I think you were part of it. There was quite a few people, John, you were part of it. In the strategic plan, I think overwhelmingly the number one thing that was a concern for the residents of both towns was vocational training. And that came up a lot. And I know that was one of the things that we attacked in our strategic plan, and I know we've sort of gone headlong into trying to expand student opportunities within vocational training. My question revolves around transportation. So if we have a student from Wilbraham that chooses to choice to another district, so let's say they choice to Ludlow, right? We lose their Chapter 70 money. Are we responsible for transporting that child from our district to another district? School choice.
No. We also actually don't lose the Chapter 70 money. The Chapter 70 money is based on the population of students who live here. But that's, yes, we do not have to transport them though.
So where does Ludlow get their money, their Chapter 70 money for that kid? Because if they're choicing in, we get school choice, right? So we get $5,000 per student. So where does that money come from? For Ludlow?
It comes from the sending district.
Comes from us.
Well, when we send it, if they come, yeah.
So, right. So what I'm saying is the net result is we lose that Chapter 70 money. Now, vocational training. We have, the bulk of our vocational training comes through LPI, correct? So the Lower Pine Valley Educational Collaborative provides us with training. However, we have identified that there are several areas in which LPVEC cannot provide support. One of them is automotive trades, the other one is agriculture. And so we have to send these kids to other districts. We're talking small amounts. But in those cases, we have to pay the tuition for the student to go to that vocational training program.
Correct.
And we also have to pay for the transportation for that child to and from.
Correct.
Is that transportation reimbursable under Chapter 71?
No.
Why not?
Good question.
So could I ask our legislators, because even though it's not a big sum, if we look at the expansion of vocational training opportunities, I think we have 39 kids that are involved in VocTech right now. Let's say we double that number or triple that number, and let's say we double it. And our transportation costs, especially if we're looking at, a lot of kids decide they want to do agriculture at Smith, we're looking at a big transportation cost. So one of the things I'd like to do is to ask our legislators to look at that and to say, why are these costs not covered under Chapter 71? I mean, we're talking probably $100,000, $200,000, and we're just giving that money away. But these kids aren't even choicing out. They're staying within our district. We just have to place them out because we don't have the curriculum within our district to pay for them.
Correct. John just reminded me, I mean, Chapter 71 is regional transportation, so everyone has the same vocational, whether you're regional or municipal. So it wouldn't qualify under that, but there are, I was thinking in terms of there are transportation reimbursements now for McKinney-Vento, as well as special education. So, you know, those are kind of the major transportation. Vocational is the one that we're really getting hit on a lot. I think it's worth also pointing out that Westfield has the only aviation tech program, so that's another one. We haven't had students choosing that program, but they could very well choose that program. We have to transport them to Westfield.
So I think the net result is that we're seeing not only a bleed from our coffers because of those transportation costs, but as we look at, you know, sort of the future of vocational training in our district, I mean, I don't see us bringing in aviation technology or automotive technology into this district. So if we increase the number of students going out there, the bleed is just going to get worse. And so, again, this is another area. Now, you go to the eastern part of the state, and you can't swing a dead cat without hitting the vocational training center. But you come out west, there's nothing out here. You know, I mean, you've got LP Vet, which provides some level of support. But, I mean, certainly not. I mean, look at, I'll use Worcester Tech as an example. I mean, Worcester Tech has such a broad panoply of options compared to what we can provide through the collaborative. And these are like towns and districts working together, trying to pool money to be able to put these programs in place for kids. The vocational education needs of children in the western part of the state is no different than it is in the eastern part of the state. So it just flummoxes me how the legislature can treat the two halves of the state so differently in terms of access to programming. So we all pay the same tax rate, right? So the question is what are we getting for it if the western part of the state can't have the same opportunities as the people in the east? That's an equity problem. That's all I got. Thanks.
Fair enough, Bill, if you don't mind. No, you raise a good point. This is the first time vocational issues really come up as far as work is concerned. I mean, I speak for myself and Brian, but the number of students currently that, and again, I just go back to asking a percentage increase over the last 5 years. Where has that increased? Do you know what the sort of numbers or percentage-wise? For the people demanding, the students demanding going to vote?
Yeah, I mean, so the cost increase of all that has been surely double-digit over the past couple of years.
Double-digit meaning what?
I mean, the biggest impact is transportation. We are, so, you know, when we have students who need to go to Smith Voc or to another vocational school, we're having to get a van to transport them. We're having to go to Vanpool, King Gray, some company that provides vans. Those vans are now upwards of $300 a day or more. We have a recent quote of $375 a day. So, you know, you figure that out times 180 days. You know, you're talking pretty big money. You're talking $50,000. It's double, more than double the cost of tuition to that vocational school just to get them there.
So it's correct, maybe you can fill us in. So a vocational student doesn't go there every day.
Say again?
Vocational student doesn't go to that school every day, right? So that van cost is not.
Yes, they do.
They go every day if they want to go in that program.
So Smith Vocational and Pathfinder are everyday programs. Our program with Lower Pioneer Valley is a half-day program, so they spend a half day here and then a half day at Lower Pioneer, or is it vice versa? I never remember.
Flip-flops.
Flip-flops, okay. So we have buses, we transport them back and forth midday. The good thing is that's sort of factored into our busing service with Lower Pioneer Valley. You know, we pay for the bus for the day, so they do that midday sort of sweep of students back and forth.
So it's a little different than Trace, where I thought maybe they went a week here and then a week there, but they're gone to that vocational school, and that's the same idea as getting transferred out, essentially.
Yeah.
And that number has increased student-wise over the last several years?
Well, the available numbers of vocational schools in Western Mass have not increased in 20-plus years. So the available seats, the numbers fluctuate a little bit year to year. We have up years and down years. Overall, though, when you're talking about a cost basis, the transportation piece has really been the biggest challenge.
Hey, Aaron, sorry, you may wanna just, for the legislators, just explain to them what you just said about the number of seats available, because I think a lot of people, especially in this room, may not fully understand the real constraints of vocational education because of the number of seats. Sure.
I was going to jump in on that too, because I'm on the executive board at LPVAC, and this is the first year that they've had a waiting list for children, and not knowing how to choose who's going to go and who is not going to go, so it's increased incredibly. They're adding more programming that they can, like they're adding criminal justice programming. But I know it's not just LPVAC, I know it's exploding everywhere.
But I think if you tour the vocational schools around Western Mass, so you're really talking Pathfinder, Smith, Franklin Tech, and look at when their last expansion was. 30 years ago, maybe. All of those buildings are getting older. They don't have new buildings. They haven't had any expansion. So the number of slots available to kids, they might switch programs around, shift some things around a little bit here and there, but there hasn't been a significant increase in available seats for students in Western Mass for those vocational programs in many, many years.
So I think the point being that when we have a student who is interested in doing automotive tech, let's say at Pathfinder, the first thing that you need is a spot available at Pathfinder. And you may have 3 spots open at Pathfinder or 4 spots open, but you may have 25 kids that apply for one of those 4 spots. So when we look at the numbers of students, and Angelo, I know exactly what you're getting to. You're getting to what's the numbers? We know the cost is increasing, but what is the interest factor? That is the number of students, and it's a very how should I say? It's not a variable that we can look at with any degree of accuracy, right? It's very deceptive because the number of students that want to go into vocational programming, but the number of kids that actually can go because of the limited number of slots available. So that number is really, it's really kind of suspect. So yes, costs are rising exorbitantly, especially in transportation, but also, like we said, when we did our strategic plan within this district, anybody who was part of that strategic plan, I think, Sue, were you part of that as well? In the strategic plan? I can't remember if you were part of it. Well, the strategic plan, I mean, it was probably 3/4 easily, 3/4 of the people that attended the strategic planning meetings, especially at the beginning, had said that their number 1 or their number 2 concern for our district was the availability of vocational training. And so it's going to get bigger. It's not going to get smaller. I mean, trades are, right now, they're suffering. I mean, you look anywhere from your tin knockers to your electricians to your plumbers. I mean, they're all hurting for qualified people. So, these are things that it's not getting any easier for us to provide these programs, and the programs that are out there, they're not growing.
I just think until we know how much it's growing, it's tough to budget or look at, do you expand, Westfield Bulk, Franklin Tech, or Pathfinder, or do we need a whole other school for that in the greater Springfield area?
Well, probably.
No, I'm just saying, so it's difficult, and obviously the cost right now is transportation, but to know how many kids, not only next year, the year after, but 5 years, 10 years, 15, how much will this be growing? Because I think you're right, there's a definite need there, but are there enough people there to warrant expanding or building?
Just on that point, I think, speaking for the 2 towns as well as the 7 members of the LPVEC, which I think is probably 11 communities, I think that our interest would be in seeing a way to expand vocational programming at LVPEC. One of the things that they're up against, because they're a collaborative that was formed as a corporation, as a bunch of the member towns, is they can't qualify for a lot of the same type of funding sources that more traditional vocational schools can. So that's another constraint I'll just put on your plate if it's something you haven't seen before.
The other constraint that I would add to that is that in Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, your instructors are required to pass the MTELs, right? And so we have teachers that are in vocational training programs that are there. They're a master in their trade. They've also passed the MTELs, but it's getting harder and harder to find those people. And so trying to work ways around vocational training where we can do externships, where we can have people that may not necessarily pass the MTELs, but can work as externship sites for like preceptorships for students. Would be a great way to expand those options, and it puts them outside of the classroom. And it's almost like a work study, but it gives you an opportunity. Not only gives the tradesmen an opportunity to work with the students to see how they're doing, but it also gives students an opportunity to work within the field to see if it's something that they like in real life. So, and that does play a huge role. And I can tell you that I've known a lot of people throughout my professional career who have told me that they would love to have a second career in education, that they'd love to go back and be a teacher, but that MTEL is just, it's a huge wall. The certifications to become a teacher and the number of credits that you need and all of the hoops that you have to jump through in order to get to that point, most people just say, forget it.
I don't want to belabor this, but it's an interesting subject that you brought up, and it's kind of intriguing, but do we know, so how many in this regional school district are, in a program, but do we know how many that have been sort of denied, right? There's waiting lists, they haven't been able to get there. So I think that would give us some tangible numbers. I know, Doctor, you said that it might be a little nebulous, but how many do we know that have, had an interest and couldn't pursue it because they were, denied?
So I'll say, just with respect to the LVPEC program, which is where our ninth graders have to go, it is a small number of students at this point. I would say it's probably a handful that we haven't been able to get in. There have been times when I've had to really advocate for kids to, try to make sure that they keep looking at their list, and if anyone drops out, go back to the wait list to see who's next up. But as Member Murray said, they are kind of crunched, and it's really now become sort of a question of which towns do they want to serve, right? Is that fair to say? Because you have the member districts, and then they also serve a lot of the other surrounding towns. And so one of the tensions that arises is, how do we maintain preference for the member districts and also meet the needs of the surrounding towns, which aren't members, but also get their vocational needs met through the LVPC. So I think that's really where the rub is right now, for us anyways. I know that there are colleagues of mine in the collaborative that have had a much larger number of students who haven't been able to get in. And that's due mainly to the fact that they have a much higher percentage of their ninth graders applying to get in.
It depends on the programming they're trying to get into and how many kids apply to that specific program. And we do have children come from other districts, but it's budgeting, it's for budgeting, because if they're not part of our member district, they get charged more for tuition, which helps us to keep the cost of our children going lower. So when our kids go to LP-VAC, their tuition is half the cost of children from not part of the collaborative. And then with the wait list thing, they can wait for the wait list, but comes a point where it doesn't matter, because their programming, it's a 4-year curriculum. So, and it has to be a 4-year curriculum because they're looking at getting certifications and like completely joining the workforce right when they graduate. So there comes a point where if they miss too much of it, it's too late. You can't start up and join that curriculum. So just a little bit more information.
What about the plan for the ninth grade?
You have, so, because of some mandates from the state and because of curriculum changes, the curriculum starts in ninth grade. They start with an exploratory, but then they pick where they're going and they start right away. So they can't miss ninth grade because it builds up all through the grades.
So I guess, how do you think we can be helpful at this point, as we brought this up? You know, I know you say about money for transportation and what have you, but I mean, we're facing some nice cuts, obviously some tough budget. We're going FY '25 with a little bit of, you know, uncertainty here, even closing out FY, 24. So I guess, you know, to round this discussion out, right, we're going to take something back. How, you know, what do you think the best way, other than, you know, should we look at the numbers? Okay, there might be this amount of students in the future, this 9th and 10th grade sort of, you know, area, or, you know, how we, you know, we got to bring something back.
So for any type of vocational training, I mean, I can understand the tuition aspect of it, but you know, the transportation cost, I mean, that's something that, you know, for us it's a big nut, right? It doesn't seem like a lot, but when you're talking $375 a day for a van to tote somebody from here to Northampton and back, yeah, that's a big deal, and so those numbers do add up. And, you know, as a school district, you know, sort of as you guys plan for your budget, you know, you guys are looking at it to say like, okay, well, you know, we gotta get our hands on what we're doing here. As a school district, we're doing the same thing. We're kind of looking at, you know, okay, like, how much interest do we really want this program to have, knowing that transportation is gonna just take a huge gouge out of our side every time another kid decides to, you know, move to a program that's not offered within the collaborative. So, you know, I think it's more visionary than there's anything else. We've talked about it for the last few years. I saw Patrick came in. Patrick was actually the one that I was talking to about it. And so, you know, as we look down the road, that's going to be a bigger issue, is because there's going to be more interest in vocational training. We can see it happening now. And then, you know, sort of the unspoken piece that we have on all of this is, which, you know, I think also plays a role, is, you know, I'm sure there are some kids who are dissuaded or discouraged from doing it because, you know, there are waiting lists, you know, and it's not just in our school district, but it's, you know, in other districts around the state, and there isn't the same opportunity. So, you know, kids are, you know, basically like, well, if they don't have automotive at LPVEC, I don't want to be spending my time on the bus going to Pathfinder or aviation tech out to Westfield. So when you ask the question, I'm sure you have kids that are interested in doing aviation tech. I just don't think they're interested in spending, 80 minutes on the bus every day schlepping from here to Westfield. So, you know, I think those are challenges that we're going to have to face. But I think looking first at the idea that, you know, that there will be some set of, there will be reimbursement for that, because these are still kids who are within, you know, they're still students in our district, and we're paying money for them to go out of district. And then in addition to that, we're paying to send them physically.
So the short, what I'm hearing is that the short ask is to allow transportation of an in-district student to an out-of-district placement to be included and be reimbursed.
I've got another ask, which is, my other ask would be to take a look at some of the barriers that exist for vocational programs that exist within the structure of collaboratives to access state funding, because really this is a model that was created in order to increase efficiency, and you see that in the tuition structure we have. As Aaron was saying, students spend half the day in our collaborative, half the day in their home school, and then half of the day at their vocational program, instead of receiving all of their academic instruction and all their vocational instruction in the same school as a student who would go there full-time. And so as a result, our tuition for students in LVPEC is about half of what it is to any other vocational school. So that is a cost-saving measure that districts have done to coordinate with each other and also to find a less costly way of doing it. So I think in a time when budgets are strained you know, I hear what you're saying about what the state financial situation is. It would seem like offering more money to lower cost solutions for expansions of those would make sense than seeking other solutions that might not be so cost effective.
Do you know how many other collaboratives across the Commonwealth there may be?
I want to say the numbers in the 20 to 30 range, and very few of them actually offer vocational education. So this is kind of a unique thing that we're doing in this area, and I think it's an innovative thing.
We could offer you sun visors.
I know. Thank you for noticing.
Don't just say, vote Ash.
It's getting close to the bottom, so I'm biding my time.
I just had a quick question going back to your initial presentation. Aaron, you noted on page 4 of your document, the post-secondary success. Where do those numbers come from?
That's actually my graph, so I'll speak to that. That comes from the Department of Education. If you look on any district's website, there's a section called Students, and if you click on the link that says post-secondary success, it will tell you both these figures. First, how many enroll immediately, which is defined as being in school the next September in a post-secondary education, and then the next thing is called persistence, which means that same student is still in a post-secondary institution 2 years after graduating.
Any clue how they collect that data?
They collect that because all of the colleges and universities in Massachusetts also have to report to DESE. For some of the universities that are out of state, the collection may be a little bit less than 100% accurate, but it's a pretty accurate numbers as far as I've been told by DESE.
Okay, thank you. My next question is regarding page 7. You have the FY 24-25 staffing reductions. So you indicated or alluded to the fact that anxiety and social, just, I'm questioning the reduction in school counselors and what schools those are and pertain to specifically, and why are we reducing school counselors when kids are facing more and more challenges socially, emotionally, everything under the sun? Why are we reducing instead of increasing those positions?
I mean, some of it's budget. Those positions were funded on the ESSER grant. That money has gone away, dries up this year. So we just don't have the funds available to keep counseling at that level.
And I'd also say class size. You know, we are getting to the point in a lot of our grades where the class sizes are bumping up against numbers that are feeling a little uncomfortable. And so, you know, the choice would be to reduce a teacher to add a counselor, and that is something we just don't really have flexibility to do. Where we had flexibility to make some reductions in class and in teaching staff was Green Meadows, the middle school. All the students who chose are transferred over to the middle school, and so those reductions have been made, but that had the effective increase in class sizes there, so that further reduces our ability to make any swaps of teachers for counselors there. So that's what it comes down to. It really all is a financial constraint in the end. But I agree. I mean, if conditions were such that the budget could support more counseling staff, it certainly would be a benefit for the students. It's a choice of one student-facing staff member versus another kind of student-facing staff member.
John.
I have a question, and I'm very new to this, so if you would give me a little education on, it's actually slide 8, shift insurance. Yeah, if you could educate me, what's going on in this slide. Basically, you've got some stuff, shading represents changes in terminology.
So a couple times, let me find it, but the shading, a couple times the state has changed how they sort of formulaically determine someone as low income. So if you look at, you know, in 2016, they changed the formula. It didn't seem to change the actual end result very much, though. And then in 22, they changed, and it does seem to have caused a bit of an uptick. So that formulaic change did change things. It's fair we're not comparing true apples to apples. We're not comparing apples to oranges, but we might be comparing apples to pears, right? So it's close, but not exactly the same. Yep.
So 2 more issues soon. We're in the ask department. So the first one is I'll beat Doug's drum a little bit, talking about transportation. We appreciate the 90%, right? So transportation reimbursement for Chapter 71 has gone up in recent years. It's still short of 100%, right? And I don't think that's really negotiable with the state. I think that just shows bad faith simply because when regional districts are created, they're created under the promise that regional transportation, regular ed regional transportation, will be reimbursed at 100%. And it just shows bad faith on the part of the state when that number is below that. Certainly it's gone up this past year. Aaron, I think we were at 90 for...
we were at 90 last year. I'm hoping that we get up there close to that this year.
And those are...
We budgeted based on hopefully something close to that.
And those are numbers that are important because remember that's a reimbursement. So, we don't see that money until the following year, right? So that gets peeled right out of our budget. And then the other piece that comes up in terms of money is that if we look at the number of students within our district, and you look at the total amount of the budget, we're spending about $18,000 a year per student to educate them. Chapter 70 allocation is $5,000. So when we take a school choice kid from another district, we get $5,000 from the sending district. Those numbers haven't changed since the Massachusetts Education Reform Act of 1993. All right? We are talking 30 years, and those numbers haven't changed. I can guarantee you that the cost of education, the cost of everything has gone up substantially in the past 30 years, and yet those numbers stay the same. So when we look at bringing school choice kids in, that number is far lower than what it really should be in terms of what we're spending to educate our students. And so, we talked about the foundation budget reform, commission and all of the recommendations that entailed in a complete revamping of Chapter 70 was part of that. But we've basically stalled out on that. And so while we've moved forward in, things like the Student Opportunity Act, which has put basically what I think, Aaron, I believe the statistic was 90% of the money in the SOA went to 15 districts in the state.
I believe it's something in like that.
It was some ridiculous statistic like that. Like most of the districts in the state saw little to nothing. But we're putting money into that, but we're not putting our money into things that are going to help all of the districts throughout the state. Education costs money. In 1993, the annual cost of a teacher was probably half of what it is today. So you could take 5 students, 6 students on school choice, and you could basically fund the position of a teacher. Today, that number is 20. You want to fund a teacher's salary, it could be anywhere between 15 and 20 students. So when you start talking about school choice, it's a big ask for districts to participate in school choice. And I know some districts, basically depend on school choice. Other ones really don't participate in it at all. But if we want school choice to survive as a program statewide, I would highly recommend that we look at those numbers because it's not feasible to keep on bringing that many kids in and getting such low reimbursement.
If I can dovetail into a little bit of that. So what are we doing right now to make things better for our students? And I think the big glowing example that we have is by offering the vocational education to students in 9th grade. We do a great job with advanced placement, international baccalaureate for students that are going on to higher education, but this is really just expanding it to the other students. It's a really great thing, I believe, that we're doing for our students. But what are the issues? As Bill had just mentioned, Chapter 71 money. I mean, hey, you got 92%. Thank you, really, thank you. But 100% really should be the goal, right? That really helps us out, because any money that we're spending on a bus, we're taking away from a teacher, we're taking away from, you know, education, counselors, exactly. That's at least that 8%, I'd say, would get us closer to having more counselors inside the schools. The second thing, as he mentioned, school choice. It does need to be revamped. Maybe if we could increase that number from 5,000 as it was, it's like 30 years ago, 25 years ago, it was 30 years ago, right? It was $5,000. You know, maybe give us that 14% that OSD was giving the private schools. The third thing is buildings in our district. The buildings get old, things fall apart, and especially in this beautiful building that we're in right now. We have a server here, a switch, excuse me. We have a switch here that is no longer sold by the manufacturer. We bought it off of eBay just to keep our school, to keep the schools going. Okay. Yes, I love that, you know, that Yankee ingenuity. But when it comes down to it, we shouldn't have to be buying stuff from eBay. Also, special ed costs. Special ed costs, we could have, you know, at one point I think we did have a couple students move in, and that was $1 million. Okay, now when we get reimbursement from special ed, Aaron, what is it? Doesn't it come out to like 80% or 77% that we totally get back?
It depends. So we have to pay roughly the first 51,000 straight up.
Right.
Then anything beyond that is based on, you know, legislature's decision on the split. It's varied from somewhere in the 60s up to, I think it's at 75% now. So it's significantly higher than it's been in the past. But.
Yeah, so we get 75%, but after paying $51,000 per student. I mean, all this adds up. Now, listen. We owe this to these students, special ed students, to take care of them. That's our moral obligation, right? And if they move into our town, they're our students. But at the end of the day, this really should be something that Massachusetts handles. It takes care of the special education, because you never know what town they're moving in and where they're living and stuff, and it can really hurt a district like it potentially really hurt us. So, go ahead.
So, just a final comment about that. When we talk about special education costs, when we talk about the circuit breaker, right? So there's that $51,000 threshold. Why? Why was there a threshold on the 14% OSD increase? Why is that threshold there? Because to me, it just seems like a neat little way for the state to sort of renege on the payment for services that are legally required. The number of students in our district with a 504 and IEP has basically doubled in my time that we've been here. Okay, so these are, all of these educational services that we're providing for these students are legally required. We can't not provide those services. But the pie is only so big, and so a greater proportion of the budgetary pie is going to a smaller number of students, right? And so at the expense of the rest of the students who are not on a 504 and IEP. So when we look at the circuit breaker, to me, the circuit breaker just, it's a fancy program that basically just gives the state an out, which is probably, I'm going to guess somewhere, I'm going to say probably greater than half of our students don't actually hit that threshold. As a matter of fact, there are students in our district who may use, some things like, let's say, speech, right? So these are things that we have a speech pathologist in our district that we have to pay a salary to, but these aren't things that necessarily can be calculated one-to-one, right? But, you know, that threshold to me is, I mean, it's annoying. I find it galling because, you know, it's like, okay, well, it's almost like the state saying, all right, well, this kid has to be, you know, has to be compromised enough for us to consider paying for it. No, I mean, these kids, State of Massachusetts says that every student in the state is eligible and should receive free and appropriate public education. But it's not free, it costs money. And so when you look at a $51,000 hurdle that you have to cross, there's a lot of students that don't meet that hurdle, but yet, you know, we end up incurring the costs. So to Sean's point, you know, if special education is, you know, that's been a big thing for Massachusetts, and it has been for a long time. My mother's terms on the school committee in the 1970s and 80s, all the way back to Chapter 766, right? These are things that the state of Massachusetts has really pushed, but at the expense of the districts that provide the services. So if the state wants to mandate this, and especially if the courts want to mandate it, we need a vehicle to pay for it, all right? Because we can't continue to carve money out of our budget for these expenses. And like I said, the circuit breaker reimbursement is great, but unless a kid hits that threshold, we're paying the whole amount.
I wish we had a nice, easy answer for you to say that I'll have Angelo fund it. But, no argument.
By the way, Brian sold you that thing on eBay.
Yeah, thanks for being the highest bidder. These are things, you know, Angelo's been at 18 years, I've been at 16 years, we've been fighting for, and we as well obviously live in the districts, had kids going through the schools, so we understand it. I wish it was our decision. I wish we had the control to make those changes. You know, we're 2 votes out of 200 legislators, and remind the governor's office and all the different departments. It's something we continue, and you're right, this isn't the only unfunded mandate in Massachusetts, not just in this area. There are others, and it is unfair, and it's ridiculous, but we'll continue to do what we can to make it right. And every year, if we can get it up to 92, 93, whatever we can do to push it higher and higher, because we know it's a burden on every school system, and we know how much it hurts. And Sean, to your point, of course, you know, special education, it's our moral obligation. We should be doing that. But we also need to make sure we can cover everything else. We need to make sure that we keep our schools open, that we have vocational opportunities, that we have opportunities for every student, that we keep the lights on. Well, not all the time, but. So we hear you, and we feel the pain, we understand it, and we'll continue to keep doing whatever we can to move forward, to hopefully get to that 100%.
And let me just add to that, you know, Bill and Sean and everybody here. I mean, obviously, you know, we have, you know, agreement was made, it should be obligated 100%, and, you know, sped monies, I know is going up, you know, obviously not only here in regionals, but in public school systems tremendously. So, but as a regional school, and as we're talking here, right, Ryan and I are both part of the regional school caucus. I know we're not at 100%, but we have increased it every year. That stuff, unfortunately, you know, unfortunately, it just doesn't happen, right? It should be 100%, we shouldn't be having this conversation, but it isn't. So the increases that we've all been sort of successful at, we've got a number of members, we go in and speak together. A lot of us in the House that have a regional school are part of that regional school caucus, right? So we go in, we talk to the Ways and Means chair, we talk to the, you know, leadership, and we bring that message back to say, wait, this is where the money needs to be done. That's why I say, wait, if we need, you know, what's the ask for more money, you know, in terms of maybe the vote stuff. We're going to go back there, we're going to still fight. We're meeting now. We put our budget together for FY25. So we're meeting now with our caucus. We just had a caucus the other day meeting for the regional schools. We're trying to put together these numbers. We asked for the 100, right? If we can get 100, perfect. Are we going to get 100? To be honest with everybody here, it's probably not going to happen this year, right? One time we had 100, but then the governor knocked it down only years and years ago. We did get to the 100, but it was Deval Patrick was the governor knocked it down at the time. But we're going to ask for some more. Hopefully we get back up, right? And we're going to continue to fight for that, continue to fight for the sped money and the circuit breaker and all these little nuances. You know, we do talk about in our caucus, and we're doing the best we can collectively. And I guess as all of us that have regionals, we do get together, we do meet, and we do bring that message forward. So we do have a pretty solid voice. We have been having some successes. Is it completely 100%? No. The goal is to get to 100%, and hopefully we can do that at some point.
Maybe we ask for 120%. That way we get 100%, okay?
All right. Maybe we
And the last bigger thought that I would leave you with at the legislative level is sort of a thought experiment to begin looking at what education is going to look like in another 20 years. Because we're seeing a lot of shifts in how education is being presented, but more importantly as a district in the western part of the state, except for your urban centers, everybody is shrinking. And so, as you get fewer students, it becomes more expensive to educate those students per pupil. The larger your district, the more offerings you can have. The smaller your district, the harder it is to offer those things. And so we have to look at, how is education going to evolve in the western part of the state coming in the next 20 and 30 years, and is the legislature going to be prepared for some of those changes? Because especially if you look at the idea of, let's say the development of mega regionals, where you have Hamden, West and Hamden East, how does that look? I mean, you could put together schools of, 3,000, 4,000 students, which would be Goliath schools and certainly would provide an unbelievable educational opportunity. But at what cost, and is the state going to even consider funding that? Because, at this point, we've got, stagnant or shrinking regional districts, stagnant or shrinking municipal districts in the western part of the state. And, we're basically we're just kind of swinging in the breeze. We're not really getting any direction. It's like, well, you're not going to get anything more than just the bare minimum of expense.
Right, and it's all falling on these two towns here. Hamden and Wilbraham, they are amazing at how much that they support our budget.
Okay.
And, they really have supported us year over year over year over year, but they can't keep it up. I mean, the pockets of the state can handle this. The pockets of our towns cannot handle the burden in the present state. And I'm just saying that, I don't know.
That's my entree, Sean, thank you.
Thank you, there you go.
Let me, I don't want to pile on the legislatures. We appreciate the fact that you do show up, you hear our concerns, our frustrations, and I think you both have done this long enough to realize that these comments are not personally directed at you, they're directed at your positions. Let me first begin by thanking the school committee and the administration for bringing forward a budget request, which I think is quite reasonable and modest, 2.45% increase in the environment that we're in. I think it is quite an accomplishment. And as a tax-paying member of the community, I thank you for that. With regards to the issue of what can the legislature do to help, I don't have to beat my regional transportation drum. You've heard that year after year. There's a direct line between the underfunding of regional transportation and our real estate tax bill. Whatever is not funded on regional transportation flows directly through to our real estate tax bill. So the ask that I have of the legislature is to fund the existing obligations before you create new obligations on the schools or anybody else. Fund the existing obligations. We've just come through a period where we've had an embarrassment of riches because of that flood of federal money. And we still didn't reach 100% reimbursement. And we still feel like we're all over twists coming and asking if we can have some more. It shouldn't be that way. This should be, the discussion of regional transportation, along with a lot of these other things, shouldn't even be the discussion, in my opinion. These should be off the table. These are obligations. Money has been available. It simply is a matter of priorities. Clearly, legislature, the leadership has not made public education, or at least suburban and rural public education, a priority. Other things keep cutting in line and taking that money. To the extent that we can assist you in anything, please ask, because we are reaching a point where we're a small town, we're under 5,000 people. We have some other big items coming up in the next several years that are going to be very, very expensive. And these continuing increases on the assessment side are going to get to a point where we are not going to be able to provide the education that we want to our kids. So thank you.
And just finishing Sean's point, so if you look at that pie graph, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think it was like $12,345,444 is what we received for Chapter 70 funding. And then our budget request of $54 million and change. If you do the math, we're paying in assessments 78% of this budget. So out of that $54 million, our assessments, the Chapter 70 is basically 12, well, it's a little bit more, it's probably a little bit less, but it's probably 77%. So 3/4 of our budget, our school budget is basically funded just because of what we charge people in our towns for taxes. So, you know, when we look at that 12 million in Chapter 70 reimbursement, it's pretty small. So, and it hasn't gotten any better. I can tell you that this is 9 years on the school committee. I can tell you that every year that number, the amount of money that we pay in assessments as a percentage of the budget has crept up. Why? Because Chapter 70 is flat and Chapter 71 is flat.
Anyone else? Okay. So on behalf of the school committee, I would like to express our gratitude to each and every one of you for taking the time to join us this evening. So representatives and all of the boards that have come together this evening. We appreciate your insights, thoughtful discussions, and your commitment to finding solutions for the betterment of our schools and our communities as we continue to navigate these budgetary challenges. So thank you again for attending this evening. And with that, may I have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Okay, so we will do roll call. Bill?
Aye.
Cheryl? Aye. Sean?
Aye.
Lisa? Aye. And myself, aye. We are adjourned at 6:36. And the board?
Good. Aye.
I found we should do this again